That's good. Senator Wyden.
Thank you very much, Senator Hatch. And while he's here, I just want to tell Senator Thune how much I've enjoyed working with him on the enforced legislation and also the legislation, what we call the de minimis legislation, the threshold for imports that aren't subject to tariffs. Clearly, both of those bills are going to be of real value in the effort to create more good-paying jobs, whether in South Dakota, Oregon, across the country, and I appreciate it. I also want to thank Senator Hatch for his help. He and Senator Baucus have been very helpful as we've moved particularly to look at the Enforce Act and to deal with the variety of issues that have come up as the debate goes forward. And I'm very grateful, Senator Hatch, to you and Senator Baucus for including it in this legislation we consider today. I think for our panel members, what you're getting a sense is how important this committee regards international trade. I mean, this is one of the economic engines of our country that allows us to, in effect, make things here, grow things here, add value to them here, and then ship them somewhere. I mean, that's, in a sense, a summary of what the potential is in terms of the American economy and global kind of trade. And when we look at some of the challenges, for example, customs and border protection, they're doing extremely important work as it relates to security, but we're concerned that some of the other functions, particularly in terms of their trade-related obligations, where they can really play a key role in effect, facilitating commerce, we're concerned that that's really getting short shrift. So I think what I'd like to do in this kind of debate about how we facilitate, commerce and Americans looking to the future, particularly these growth markets in Asia, Brazil, and elsewhere, while we combat unfair commerce. And I noticed, Ms. Silcox, you held up that circuit breaker, the phony circuit breaker, not real different than the kind of phony goods that Oregon companies, whether they're Nike or a whole host of companies, are holding up. So you all have kind of spotlighted the problem for us today, and of course it relates to this potential for expanded trade and commerce, which in my state is responsible for about 1 out of 6 jobs. We're traders in Oregon. The trade jobs pay better than do the non-trade jobs. And I just have a couple of questions for you four that kind of relate to this function. On the question of customs and border protection, the real question is how we reinvigorate this commitment to the trade side of CBP. Now, some people, I think, basically say that we can just politely ask the agency to do a better job. To tell you the truth, we have done that. We have gone that route. We have essentially, through letters and even at hearings, we basically said, look, we'd like to see you go about your business. You have extensive authority in this area. We need you to do a better job for the reasons just I've outlined. Facilitate the commerce where so many American businesses have great stakes and combat unfair commerce. That hasn't worked. So that's why we felt that we needed to have an actual piece of legislation, which would ensure accountability, facilitate the movement of goods through ports, and collecting the appropriate tariffs that are assigned to imports, stopping imports of goods that, in effect, infringe on intellectual property. We got to get those things done. So my question is, do you all feel that legislation is warranted at this point to deal with these issues? You can choose, by the way, to say, hey, you don't have to go a legislative route. Maybe it's going to get done just by posing requests. We felt on a bipartisan basis that at this point, we think legislation is needed to get a reinvigorated focus at customs on this trade function. So if you would, we'll just go right down the row. We'll start with you, Ms. Comstock, and I know you're from the West, our part of the world, and we welcome you.
Thank you very much. Senator, I do feel that the bill is important. I know that in 2009, there was a similar bill, and I believe that CBP has made an awful lot of progress between 2009 and now. This bill codifies some of the things that they are doing, the Centers for Excellence and Expertise. I think it's pushing them further forward, and so I do really support this bill at this time.
Very good. And I think that's always the hope, is that as you spotlight the problems, make it clear that you do feel that you're going to, I'd characterize it, reinvigorate the trade function there. As much headway as can be made administratively is always on the good side. I think we need to go further, and frankly, I think without the kind of glare that this committee has put on this issue in a bipartisan way, I'm not sure we would have even gotten this far. So, Mr. Silcox, your thoughts on the idea that legislation would be useful at this point?
We support this legislation, but I think it's worth taking a step back and looking what both the Congress and the administrations, I say that plural, have done for the past 7, 8, 9 years. A few years ago, there was an incremental change with the Stop Counterfeiting and Manufacturers Good Act, which passed this bill, which dealt with a couple of little points that related to enforcement. A few years later, there was the Pro-IP Act, which passed Congress, that created, at least in the executive branch, a more coordinated enforcement program involving the administration at the highest levels in the White House, the Justice Department, and other relevant agencies. As a result of that legislation, the administrations, again plural, started building a little bit of the structure that is now going to be codified in this act. So a key portion, again, and this was part of the Pro-IP Act, but it's in this bill as well, is the accountability to Congress. And the ability to come back to this committee and report on, this is what we've been doing, this is how our resources have been allocated, so that there is some oversight. And that is what I know industry has been looking for, for a number of years in the IP area, is periodic oversight to just ensure that the resources are adequate and that the program is on track to get what Congress wants and the people want.
Our chairman, Senator Baucus, returned. Let's just see if we can wrap up with the two other witnesses on the question of the value of actually having legislation here. And I thank the chair for the courtesy. And while you were gone also, Chairman Baucus, I just wanted to reiterate how much I appreciate your working with me on this legislation. We have been toiling on enforce in a bipartisan way for some time, and I think now with the excellent bill that you and Senator Hatch are sponsoring, we're ready to go, and I appreciate it. So let's just wrap up the comments. Mr. Cooper, if you would.
We'll do it quickly. First, I would echo the comments that Ms. Comstock and Mr. Silcox said about the codification of some of these components into legislation versus just an informal request to CBP. Again, while we've been making progress, really defining them and having them in legislation is important. And additionally, the creating of the high-level positions within CBP to focus on trade facilitation will really ensure that that part of CBP's mission gets the focus that it deserves, and believe that that's an important reason to pass this.
Very good, and we'll wrap up with Mr. Cook.
I'll reiterate everything that was previously said, but again, the importance of the dual mission that CBP has of security and trade facilitation. This proposed legislation codifies all the pieces that will allow them to keep at the forefront that mission of trade facilitation.
Very good. Thank you all. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.